Hello, hello. Welcome to Courage Becomes Her, where we connect and share real life stories. I'll talk with women whom I love and I'm inspired by, women who are experiencing life just like you and me. I'm excited for us to gather together and cultivate confidence, courage, and joy in life and work. Hello, friends. Thank you for joining me today for this bonus episode of Courage Becomes Her, where we're continuing our summer read series with author Melissa Johnson. So Melissa is a marriage and family therapist as well as a spiritual director. She also teaches a course on soul well-being at Bethel University. She is the founder of Impossible Beauty, which is a blog and a podcast that are dedicated to redefining beauty as the life of God at work in us and among us. Melissa and her husband and their greater families live near Minneapolis, Minnesota. So today we're talking about Melissa's new book, Soul Deep Beauty, Fighting for Our True Worth in a World Demanding Flawless. Wow, this conversation is pretty incredible. So Melissa talks about her journey through an eating disorder and body shaming as a 30-something-year-old, which is not typically the demographic where that is focused on and concentrated on. So she talks about that in our conversation today, which is just really, really fascinating. She also talks about how our culture is breeding toxicity by tying a woman's value and a woman's worth to her body and its thinness. And she talks about what the biggest contributors were to her eating disorder and what ultimately helped her to change the narrative and the focus so that she had an eternal view of beauty, as she calls it, which is just a really lovely part of our conversation and a very rich part of the book. Melissa wants to create safe spaces that are filled with grace, where we can authentically love ourselves and each other. And this is just a precious conversation with a really, really sweet woman. So thank you for listening in and joining me for this conversation with Melissa Johnson about her new book, Soul Deep Beauty. Melissa, thank you so much for joining me today for this bonus episode conversation for Courage Becomes Her. I am really glad and grateful to have you with us and to be able to talk about your book here in a moment. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure. All right. So let's start with a few get to know you questions. So first off, where is home? And tell us a little bit about home life.
Yeah. So we live near St. Paul, Minnesota. So, they're the Twin Cities here, St. Paul, Minneapolis. So sometimes people recognize Minneapolis a little bit more than St. Paul. But so I'm from Minnesota and I live here with my husband. And actually our neighborhood is like an old Christmas tree farm. So we have a lot of like pine trees around, which is gorgeous and I love it. But home life is, he and I do have a lot of family in the area. And so I absolutely love my nieces and nephews and just find myself like going to all of their activities. And I actually went to an activity a couple of weeks ago and someone's like, do you just live really close by that you're like at all their activities? I'm like, no, I'm not that close, but I just like to be there for supporting them. And and so I'm pretty close knit with my nuclear family growing up, and my husband's family's from around the area too. So I think Minnesota has a lot of people who just kind of stick around. And as a result, though, I just really love my friends and family in this area, which we were talking before we pressed record. And I think sometimes our winters are so long, and I wouldn't mind living further south. But here we are, and I can't leave my friends and family because the community's too good.
Community makes all the difference. It absolutely does. Yeah, totally makes sense. All right. What's a current obsession of yours? Any genre?
Yeah, maybe this is a weird one, but in the summer, I get obsessed with water skiing because we talked about this and before again, when we press record, and I just love water. There's something about water that's so therapeutic, but also just I connect to God, and I don't know if it's like the energy of the water or just I just love being on the water, in the water, just really anything to do with water. And so we grew up water skiing, and my dad taught us all how to water ski. And so yeah, slalom skiing, like I will just sit around waiting for someone when we're up at the lake to please bring me. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
I love it. I love that. And I personally love slalom skiing as well, although I have not been in a long time. So I would love to get back out there.
So fun. Yes.
All right. What has filled your cup in the last few days or so?
Yeah. And clearly I'm just very like sensory. So being outside, like I feel like, sitting in the sun, I'll bring my work outside and sit in the sun and just listening to like the birds and things. We just had a really long winter where everything was frozen and it was not super pleasant to be outside. So really just being outside in nature and enjoying all that has to offer has been really meaningful for me lately.
I love that. That's so good. 2 or 3 conversations ago, I talked with Jennifer Dukesley about her new book. And in that, she talked about an app that she is just absolutely obsessed with, that you can record a bird singing, whatever, and it will tell you everything about that bird. That was really, really amazing.
I had no idea. Technology is so
Me neither.
I didn't even know that could be a thing. Wow.
I know. Yeah. So amazing. All right. Last question for our get to know you. What is a book that has transformed your life?
It's such a hard question. But I will, if it's okay, I'll give 2. Cause like one is, I'll go ahead and talk about John Eldridge's, I think it was called Waking the Dead. But just this idea of, I think I read it when I was in college, like during one of the summers during college. And I just remember it deeply resonating with me. Like we're all kind of, we can just get into these cultural trances and not remember like the larger story, epic story that we're a part of, and how God is inviting us into this love story, this rescue story, and how our lives are much more meaningful and more consequential than I had previously ever considered. And I loved that. It just felt so energizing and like romantic in a way, not like in a weird way, but like, like very deeply meaningful. And then I would say more recently, in terms of like what we're going to be talking about today related to the book, I found Anti-Diet by Christy Harrison to be very, very helpful in terms of shifting some narratives around, just exposing narratives of diet culture that we are steeped in, but then helping me continue to choose something different.
That's good. Thank you very much. And yeah, I have not read that, but you talk about it in the book. So your book, Soul Deep Beauty, Fighting for Our True Worth in a World Demanding Flawless. And we'll talk about it in a moment, but you very vulnerably and very courageously share about your journey through an eating disorder and body shaming. And I am so grateful that you decided, and you talk about it in the book, to be honest about your brokenness and your journey with the intent to create, you say, safe spaces that are filled with grace, where we can authentically love others and ourselves through life. And I just love that so much, that you are, again, your vulnerability, your courageousness to share. So thank you for writing the book. I appreciate it. And I'm really looking forward to talking with you about it today.
Thank you. And thank you for saying that. I think one of the things in releasing it has been kind of that element. I'm a pretty private person. And so like to talk about something that I don't feel like, it wasn't like an exercise of, of fun or anything. It really felt like an invitation from God to share this for the purpose of hopefully helping us all move towards something different. And so, yeah, I appreciate you kind of seeing that and your encouragement around that. So thank you.
Oh, of course. Oh, my pleasure. Absolutely. So I several things I want us to talk about, but I'd like for us to start with, you really spend about the first half of the book basically calling out the American system of beauty. And you specifically talk about and call them out for making a tie to a woman's value, to a woman's worth, based on her beauty, based on her body, based on her thinness, are some of kind of the specific words that you use. So explain just a little bit about that and kind of that aha or that realization for you.
Yeah. So when I started intensive eating disorder treatment, I mean, I could just say that, first of all, it was really surprising to me because honestly, I felt like I was trying to do it, quote, right by, following the cultural ideas around food and exercise. And so I think even that realization that I had an eating disorder took me a while to actually let that settle in and believe that that was true. But then even more than that, like as I got into treatment, I started to see that the same beliefs and narratives and even behaviors often that I was seeing in the therapy group rooms and discussions were the same things that were being believed and talked about outside of the rooms. So like with peers and friends and, casually what I would hear like out in public and even like in the media and commercials, I was like, we're all under this cultural trance regarding beauty and body image and the expectations around that. And so that was kind of like the wake up call aha moment. Like, wait a minute, we're all swimming in toxic waters, but I don't know that we see how toxic they are. And I think it was like a canary in the coal mine type of a situation where in these rooms, I could see the treatment rooms, I could see like, wow, this is really like might kill some people. But I also saw that I think this is actually depleting us all of life to some extent. So for me, that was kind of the aha, because, I think it's interesting too, because I've thought about this. I think previously, before my treatment experience, I probably would have said like, oh yeah, it's probably not good that all of our, like the media that we intake and things like that are all likely photoshopped to an extent.
Right.
But I didn't see like the soul deep damage. And I think the depth and extent of damage until I had to sit in it literally for months.
Yeah. Wow. That makes so much sense. Thank you. You talk about, and they're more than this, but you talk about 3 big contributors to you specifically. You say perfectionism, comparison, and shame. So those being some of the biggest contributors for you for your journey. So talk a little bit about those 3 and kind of what they looked like for you, and maybe what you've, seen outside of yourself as well for those 3.
Yeah. And what was comparison, shame, and what was the third one, did you say?
Perfectionism.
Yeah. And I think as I'm looking at those, I think like shame is probably because I think the comparison leads to shame. And I think the perfectionism is almost trying to ward off shame in a way.
Yeah.
So I feel like shame is like the bedrock of all of those, like the core, if that makes sense. And so, sorry, I'm like in my own head. What was the follow-up question regarding those 3 pieces?
Just what did they look like for you? Like, how did each of those play out for you in this journey?
Yeah. I mean, I think there was this current of like never good enough. And it's really interesting though too, because I wasn't someone who like grew up and like I wouldn't have thought that I would be the person who had an eating disorder, because I was not the person who grew up and was like constantly critiquing or berating my body. I actually was like felt like confident, and by that I meant like, or I mean, like I didn't really think about my body in terms of critiquing it until later. And so for me, I think like what happened though, I think is that, well, I'll talk about the perfectionism piece, is I think I wanted to do the cultural rules perfectly. And so with that, whatever that would mean, like when diet culture tells us, you should eat these foods and don't eat these foods, or you should get in this amount of exercise or steps, or, whatever it is. And so I think my perfectionism would step in and want to do it right.
Got it.
And then I think with the comparison piece, again, I really wasn't like someone who I really, that part took me by surprise. Looking back on it, I think what that just feels very, I mean, first of all, I'll say like culturally, I don't know if you remember this, but like in the 80s and 90s, we had these like who wore it better
Yes.
segments and things like that.
Yeah.
So I think things like that have helped me see that I think we have not only been, I think we've been taught to compare ourselves with other women, but also I think for me, that was like a really big part of my eating disorder. Because I think what started as like good intentions, and then became disordered, then became, there was this like growing gravity to it. Then it became like an obsession almost. And so I think that comparison piece was a pretty significant part of the disorder. Though, like I said, and this is why it's even talking about this now, I'm like, I think there is these things are like symptomatic or cornerstone of eating disorders, but they're also so in the culture too. And so it's kind of like where was that line from unhealthy, maybe an unhealthy practice to going into like a place of a disorder. And then shame, of course. Yeah, I think for that one, I think I didn't even realize what shame was, because I didn't until I started to kind of study it on my own. Actually, ironically, when I was in eating disorder treatment, I was also pursuing an additional degree in spiritual formation. And one of my classes was shame and grace. And so like yeah, I mean, like I want to say it's ironic, but also I'm like, how is, to what extent
meant to be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I didn't even realize the spiritual reality of shame. And I talk about this in the book, one of my like therapy mentors, she had said that she can feel the shift in a therapy room when shame enters. And I think I started to realize like, oh, I feel shame in my body. Like there's like a pit in my stomach for me, or, I think for all of us, shame can look differently. But I think with shame was that message of like not good enough in some way, or it's like whatever it is, my body isn't good enough, or my food isn't good enough. But what I started to realize too, which was actually very freeing because I was able to start fighting against it, was just how like marketers and corporations use shame as a tool to sell products. And so I started to see like, wait a second, this actually isn't about my wrongness or the wrongness of my body or my food. This is about a very like perverse agenda for people to make a ton of money. I think for me, what is so sad about that is that it goes to the core of who we are as humans. And I have this definition of shame pulled up that Brene Brown gives us. And so she defines it as an intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. And so I think our deepest human desire is to be known and loved, and shame goes to the core of that and says, no, you're unworthy of love and belonging. And so the fact that, these ads and persuasive marketers are going right to the core of our deepest human desires. Like that is really astounding and alarming to me.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. That's really helpful to have an understanding of that for sure. Just interrupting the conversation with Melissa really quick to let you know that Bethany House Baker Publishing Group, the publisher of Melissa's book, is giving away a copy of Soul Deep Beauty, of Melissa's book, to the Courage Becomes Her listeners. You can enter to win that through the June 30th post on my Instagram, just Instagram Laurel Emery. So go over there and enter to win a copy. And I also want you to think about the woman in your life who is struggling with body shaming, which pretty much is every single one of us. So think about that woman, at least one, and send this episode to her right now. I know that Melissa's vulnerability can help each and every one of us as we go through this lifelong battle. You kind of alluded to it, but in the book, you basically say that you came to a place where you realized that you needed to kind of flip the script, that you needed to change the narrative for yourself. Mm-hmm. And you said specifically to focus on growing wisdom, growing compassion, and growing intuition, if I remember those three correctly. So I'd love to know, like, what helped that realization, or what created that realization for you of, thinking, okay, I need to change the narrative. I need to flip the script for myself. And how did you change that focus?
Yeah. I think what I started to see is the things I was being sold were not for my good. I saw the true agenda of those things. And I was also seeing how, this idea, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know how much of this was like in the moment and how much of this is like, looking back, like after my treatment experience. Mm-hmm. But that we have this idea of like the kingdom of God or shalom in the Bible. And there, like within that concept is like connection and interconnection and integration. Like that seems to be at the heart of thriving and wholeness for humanity. And I started to see how actually cultural beauty and these messages I was believing and like going after, the trajectory of them was anything but all of those things. Like it was actually disintegration. And Dr. Kurt Thompson talks about even how shame, it divides neural networks. And so even within our own brain. And so there is this disintegrating effect within us when it comes to shame. And I would say these narratives, this disconnection that happens with comparison between women and also with our own bodies as we begin to judge and critique our embodied self. And so I think I started to see like the trajectory of broken beauty. And then I also started to see, like I mentioned, I was in these classes for spiritual formation, and I started to get introduced to writings of like the Christian mystics. And that really like captured my mind and my heart in a different way. I think I'd grown up in the Christian tradition and had studied scripture, throughout my childhood really. And then, throughout my whole lifespan. However, I think there was something different about listening and reading the Christian mystics and how they talked about God's love. And for them, it was like this, like they experienced God's love in such tangible ways. And so I started to think about the beauty of that. And when I started to think about that kind of love and that kind of beauty, and then compared it to societal ideas of beauty, it just like totally, I saw how insignificant and broken and like nefarious the societal idea of beauty is when we compare it to this giant beauty that actually like blows our minds and is beyond what we can actually comprehend. And so I think for me, being able to see, like, play the tape forward and down both tracks, like the track of societal beauty and what it led to, and the track of authentic beauty, which I came to define authentic beauty as the life of God at work in us and among us. And so if that is how I define beauty, the road I'm going down to pursue that kind of beauty is actually going to lead me toward wholeness and integration and all of the things that I would say are characteristics of like the kingdom of God or shalom.
So good. I loved that you talked about the eternal view of beauty. That was one of the aspects of the book that it was like, wow, it just is such a expansion of our perspective. So I really appreciate you talking about that, sharing about that. You just said it a little bit a moment ago, but in the book, you also talk about how you basically had a realization of some sort. And I think these are more my words than yours, that you had like a faulty belief about who God is and how God saw you. Like, I think you said, like his acceptance of you, his compassion toward you, like you just didn't have, you had faulty views or, just had inaccurate thoughts about those two in particular. So talk a little bit more about that, kind of reframing your belief around his acceptance of you, his love for you, his compassion toward you.
Yeah. That's a really great question. I think where some of my faulty ideas came from, I mean, honestly, like, I think it was I think I actually felt like there was like a void. Like I didn't know what God thought. And so I think I kind of placed my own assumptions in the mix.
Yeah.
And I also think oftentimes when I would hear about things like body image struggles or eating disorders in church contexts, it was usually framed as, this is idolatry, don't do it. And I didn't find that to be especially helpful. And so because from that, I think it increases shame, but also it makes it seem like I'm doing something wrong. Whereas, I mean, we know with mental illness or just really any struggle, oftentimes, there's so many things that go into it that I think just to saying that it's idolatry isn't going to be so redemptive or helpful. And so in my experience though, and at one point in the book, it's just to kind of paint a picture of this, I had this idea of my journey with an eating disorder and my faith were like two parallel tracks. Like I tried to do the rules of food and exercise with the eating disorder and tried to follow God as I felt like I was being called to do, but they really didn't interact or intersect that in ways that I could see. I just didn't know how to integrate them. But again, during this, one of the things I had an opportunity to do when I was in this program for spiritual formation is have a time of prayer, of imaginative prayer with a partner. And during that time, I actually had a pretty profound experience where she invited me to envision the face of God. And it was like all of a sudden I saw like the face of Jesus is what I envisioned. And the compassion in his eyes was remarkable and so loving and gentle. And it was like this sense of like, I see it, like I see like how you've gotten to where you are. And I understand it. Like almost that he didn't say this in my mind, but like, it's not your fault, but like, it's, it's like, I've seen how it's come to this and like, I'm in it with you. And so there was this like deep compassion and empathy and understanding, but also this like advocacy, like we're going to do this together and I'm in it, all the way with you. And so that shifted from this place of this assumption of judgment, feeling like I was judged likely from the church and from God because of my struggle, to a place of like deep acceptance of who I was and deep love and grace and advocacy.
Gosh, I love that so much. And it's something that I know you long for other women to experience as well as I do. But it is something that is so experiential that, as you said, like thinking back to the mystics, like it's not something that we can fabricate. It's not something that we can, set up, so to speak, for someone else. But when you do experience that, wow, it is just so, so good. So good. And I think you talk a lot about it, of how that then led you to a place of being able to be compassionate toward yourself as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No, thank you for saying that. Yeah. And I think that that's so key. Self-compassion. And then I think also we're able to give that to other people in a way that the world is so hungry for.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. Well, I know I said it already, but I am just, again, so blown away by your vulnerability, your courage to share and to just open up about, your growth. So maybe tell us who or what is inspiring courage in you as you are in this season on this journey.
So when you first mentioned this question, something immediately came to mind, and I don't know if this is a weird answer, but because but I'll just go ahead and say what came to mind.
Yeah, please.
So I don't know if you're familiar with the National Geographic series, A Small Light. It's based on
No.
So it's Meep Geese. So the woman who helped hide the Franks, Anne Frank and her family.
Okay.
So it's the documentary about Meep Geese and just her courage in just being a faithful friend. And it's just this idea that, being a small light in the world, what a huge difference it can make. And she actually is the one who gathered and saved Anne Frank's diary and ended up giving it to Otto Frank at the end of the war. And I am just so inspired by her and people like her who, stand up in the face, like when their life is on the line, they are able to stand up in the face of adversity and opposition and danger when they know it's the right thing to do.
So good. I love that. Yes, it's so inspiring. And I think we all have the opportunity to do that. Maybe not on as big of a scale as that, but like you said, and we talked about in the beginning, like that's what creating these safe spaces of grace for each other is all about, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for writing your book and for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much.
I cannot begin to tell you how we barely scratched the surface of how big of an issue that this is in our culture. And Melissa does a phenomenal job in her book of really deep diving that. So that alone is reason for you to get the book. We also didn't really cover or talk much about what it looks like to eat and exercise mindfully without becoming obsessed or fixated. And that also is an area that Melissa covers in the book that I personally found very helpful. So don't miss out on winning a copy of the book through the June 30th Instagram post on my Instagram, Laurel Emery, or purchase a copy through anywhere that books are sold. Soul Deep Beauty by Melissa Johnson. I also want to encourage you to go back if you haven't listened to the last 2 bonus episodes with Jennifer Dukesley and Rachel Barbeau about their new books that have come out recently. And then this past Tuesday's regular episode, you're going to want to go over and listen to that. It's with Sarah McDaniel about the restoration of her historic 1930s villas in Louisiana, Minden, Louisiana. So head on over and take a listen to that. So thank you so much. And we'll be back next week with another bonus episode of the Summer Read series. What an honor to help you to cultivate confidence, courage, and joy in your life and work. Thank you so much for inviting me to journey with you. I look forward to being back with you next week, where we'll hear another story from a woman whom I love and am inspired by and look forward to learning from.